comes in, then we will get started. I just want to introduce myself in the meantime and just say a few opening words. For more than 20 years, the NAPA Standing Panel on Social Equity and Governance has hosted an annual conference to share innovative strategies that foster equity to ensure that government works and works for all. Under the leadership of Gary Glickman, our standing panel we have a dynamic steering committee. We've worked together to advance equity, not just now, but always. My name is Jade Berry James. I'm vice chair of that standing panel on social equity and governance. I'm also a professor at North Carolina State University in the Department of Public Administration. And currently I serve as chair of the faculty at NC State. This year, I just want to add in the accolades to others, to say congratulations to the conference program chair, as well as the conference co-chairs. They're friends. Richard is a NAPA fellow. Jose and Agatha are longtime friends in the field, and they've done almost everything they could humanly possibly do to promote leadership for democracy and social justice. So I think that you're going to be you would enjoy our next presentation. I'm just wanting to make sure, I'm going to go off camera for about 10 seconds to see where things stand. Okay, Agatha?
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
In the meantime, what I would like to do is give a couple plugs for some of our other upcoming sessions, starting with one of our morning breakout sessions, which is going to be a bilingual panel led by our very own Dr. Jose Luis Irizarry. This is one of our only bilingual Spanish-English panels. Hopefully in the future, we'll have many more and in many other languages. This is Language and Social Equity Challenges, Fostering Diverse and Inclusive and Democratic Participation. So that will be taking place in the concurrent breakout sessions. To join the breakouts, you'll see a breakout room down on your control panel. Again, the only one that's really being occupied right now is the networking lounge and our help desk, but the concurrent sessions will start at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. If you don't see the breakout rooms on your control panel, click the more and the three dots, and then you should see an option, breakout rooms, and then you click the blue join button to actually join one of the breakout rooms, and you'll be able to return to this main meeting room anytime, as well as to be able to go to different sessions. Just as a reminder, we are recording these sessions and we will be uploading them to a YouTube playlist for you to share and enjoy afterwards. While we wait for our opening speaker, I'd also just like to put a little plug in for one of our plenary special sessions taking place this afternoon. Very important topic, a crucial conversation on the necessity of critical race theory in the public sector, led by Planning Committee Track Chair Vanessa Lopez Littleton from the University, California State University, Monterey Bay, Rashmi Tradia from Seattle University, Aaron C. Rollins Jr. from the University of Louisville, Mary Heckler from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and Sean McCandless from the University of Illinois, Springfield. At 2:15 this afternoon, we're going to have delegate designate Kimberly Teehee, who is a U.S. House of Representatives from the Cherokee Nation. And that session will be moderated by Elizabeth Overman with an introduction from Melissa Rosenfeld. At 3:30 this afternoon, we will have our MPA and social equity panel led by Felipe Blanco, who is one of the core organizers, along with Frenicia Moore. That panel will definitely have a lot of MPA students and recent graduates who will be sharing their experiences as well, and we encourage you to join and provide your support. And then again, we hope that you will also join us again tomorrow for another full day of events. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Agatha. I appreciate plugging some of those exciting um, panels that are coming on later in the day. I do want to, in the interest of time, make sure that I go ahead and get started. Let's see, I think that Mr. Baines is on. Let's see if we could spotlight him. Ah, there he is. Hello, sir, and welcome to you.
Thank you. It's great to be on. I appreciate the opportunity. How's everyone doing?
We're doing great. We had some conference updates today. There are more than 1,200 people who are attending the conference this year. It's quite honestly the largest conference in the history of the Social Equity Leadership Conference. You know, we've been doing this conference for about 20 years. We're honored this year. NAPA is the Standing Panel on Social Equity and Governance to co-host this conference with the University of San Francisco. Our friends are doing a great job just really showcasing how leadership matters and why social equity matters. And so it's really an honor to have you here today. As long as you are ready to get started, I am ready to get started also.
Okay, should I just jump in then?
Well, just give me a second. I'm going to tee it up a little bit. You know, this is, a few of us are serving as volunteers and hosts, so we're making sure that people are admitted. There'll be people who are joining us, but I'll just tee it up a little bit for you. Definitely want to introduce you to our group of people here. So I'll just get started. Our conference audience typically consists of fellows of the National Academy of Public Administration program faculty from institutions of higher education, state and local government officials and employees, nonprofit professionals and graduate students in public policy, public affairs, and public administration programs across the country and around the world. This year, it's my distinct pleasure for all of our conference participants to introduce Mr. Chirag Baines as our plenary speaker. Mr. Baines will provide remarks on the Biden administration's executive order on advancing equity and racial justice through the federal government, the view ahead. And if time permits, he has agreed to answer a few questions that can be submitted to me or had been submitted to me through different features. So let me just tell you a little bit about Mr. Baines. I asked him for a copy of his bio as well as a picture to include in our conference program. Mr. Baines is Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy Director of the Domestic Policy Council for Racial Justice and Equity. He supervises DPC's democracy and voting rights, criminal justice, disability, Native affairs, racial wealth gap, and broad equity portfolios. In his work, it includes the implementation of President Biden's Executive Order 13985, which advances racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government, and the Executive Order 14035, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility in the Federal Workforce. These executive orders apply across every agency and department. Mr. Baines has a long history of public service. Previously, he served as Special Assistant to the President for Criminal Justice and Guns Policy at the Domestic Policy Council. He also served as Director of Legal Strategies for the nonprofit organization Demos. He served as a civil rights division, as an attorney in the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. He also was involved and co-wrote the Ferguson Report and sued Ferguson, Missouri over unconstitutional policing and court practices. On the Harvard Law Review. He's a Truman Scholar, a Gates Scholar, a Paul and Daisy Soros New American Fellow, and Carl Fellow in public affairs. You know, I dare to say that Mr. Baines is both a scholar and an activist. He is, in fact, everything that we want to see regarding social equity champion champions, and it's really my honor to introduce him to this group today. And I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about the view ahead. So I'm going to turn over the mic, if you will, to Mr. Baines. Just going to pass the mic right to you, and I'm going to mute myself until you finish your remarks today. Thank you again, and welcome to the 2022 Social Equity Leadership Conference.
Wonderful. Thank you for that very generous and warm welcome. I am Chirag Baines. I lead the team at the Domestic Policy Council that is called the Racial Justice and Equity Team. DPC, the Domestic Policy Council, drives the president's agenda, the domestic agenda, forward through all the agencies. That is centralizing the priorities and making sure that we are really pushing forward to deliver on the president's commitments and his agenda. The Racial Justice and Equity Team is one of the pillars of the Domestic Policy Council, and I know of interest to this group. It is an honor to join the National Academy of Public Administration and the Social Equity Leadership Conference today to discuss what is truly a whole of government approach that President Biden is taking to equity and racial justice. And look, these issues could not be more urgent. Systemic racism, discrimination, and persistent poverty offend the promise of America, and they hold all of us back. This is not just about those who suffer discrimination. It's really a national problem, a national set of issues that we all have to contend with. When a family of color has to hide their family pictures to get their home fairly appraised, when parents of a transgendered child face a child abuse investigation simply for getting their child the gender-affirming care that they need, when Black Americans can be gunned down while out shopping for groceries just for the color of their skin, we have to say together, no. We have to say we reject this. We reject the poison of white supremacy, as the president said after Buffalo. We insist on an America where every person can live in dignity and in security in who they are. And we commit to using the full power of the government to make real the vision of equal opportunity where all people can thrive. That's what this work is really about. And it was on his very first day in office that the president signed this executive order, the historic order on equity that charged the whole of the federal government with advancing equity and racial justice for all, including underserved groups that have suffered historic discrimination or disinvestment. That's communities of color, Native Americans, LGBTQI+ individuals, people with disabilities, members of religious minorities, people who live in rural communities, and communities facing persistent poverty. This day one commitment has been our North Star, and it has provided a powerful mandate to advance equity in the federal government through all the agencies, from the Oval Office to the Post Office, as we like to say. In April, just to make this very concrete, in April, 90 federal agencies released a historic package of equity action plans. You all know how government works. You know that the business of doing government is, we don't just sit and think good thoughts and put out policies. It is, we are deep in the guts of agencies in order to make real this promise for equity. That's what these equity action plans reflect. They reflect the thinking of people who are career officials as well as political appointees, and who have benefited from the expertise of outside experts and people who experience these issues day to day, that is community. That's what you'll see in these equity action plans. They lay out more than 300 concrete, innovative new strategies and commitments to address systemic barriers in government programs and policies. These are barriers that hold people back from prosperity, from dignity, and from basic equality. And the plans represent how the entire federal government has made equity the new approach to governing and how it'll transform how we serve people. I'll give you a few examples because I know this group will be particularly interested from these equity action plans. One example is that the Environmental Protection Agency is revitalizing its focus on environmental justice. It's shifting its civil rights enforcement from primarily responding to complaints to proactively initiating reviews and launching a new decision-making tool that assesses the cumulative impacts of pollution as opposed to looking at them in kind of isolation. That's a really significant shift to how EPA is going to do its enforcement work. Another example, to bring down the outrageously high rates of maternal mortality among Black and Native women, in particular in America, the Department of Health and Human Services is working with states to expand Medicaid postpartum coverage for a full year after childbirth. This is a critical period during which nearly 12% of postpartum deaths occur. The Department of Commerce is investing nearly $50 billion in rural communities and other communities to expand broadband infrastructure to close the digital divide. That's a huge equity issue in this modern economy. The Department of Homeland Security is working to remove barriers that transgender travelers have too often faced in airport screenings. And the Department of Labor is increasing its enforcement against wage theft and other violations that disproportionately hurt women of color. I just gave you 5 examples. There are more than 300 across these action plans. The plans also embed equity into the day-to-day work of federal government. This is what I meant when I was talking about getting into the guts of how we do government, how we serve Americans. From making it easier to fill out forms and navigate websites, which are far too complicated too often, to using demographic data to make better policy and deliver better results for the American people. You'll see all of that reflected in the plans. Let me spend a moment on the data point. We know that in order to advance equitable policy outcomes, we need to disaggregate our data and understand who's missing from the numbers and from the stories that we're collecting and basing our policymaking on. To that end, the Equitable Data Working Group, which is something that was set up based on that day one executive order from the president, has been working to identify shortcomings in our data collection infrastructure, and it has laid out a strategy for improving equitable data practices in the federal government. The working group did a report that was rolled out just over a month ago, and you can find that online at whitehouse.gov, that presents what is required to achieve our vision for equitable data. That includes making disaggregated data the norm, while robustly protecting privacy. That's an important balance that we have to strike. It means catalyzing existing federal infrastructure to leverage underused data. There's a lot of data we do collect that we don't use to its fullest. It means building the capacity to assess equity in policymaking and program implementation. That means we need people who understand the data, who know how to analyze it for what the impacts of different policy options are. And it means always remaining accountable to the American public. It's a big part of why we need more data, so people can understand how our policies are serving the American public. So I urge you to visit our website, whitehouse.gov/equity. You will find this information there, but not just to check out what we're doing and understand it, but to give us your thoughts, share your recommendations. I hope that your input will inform where we go in the future. We want to know what's working in your communities and, frankly, where we're falling short and can do better as well. The Equity Executive Order is a core component of our equity agenda. It's why I've spent some time on it here. But I also want to underscore it's only one element in a comprehensive approach to equity. The president has actually signed over 10 executive orders that address equity, including an executive order on diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce, an executive order on LGBTQI+ civil rights, an order on ensuring gender equity, and recently an executive order on policing reform. The murder of George Floyd exposed for many what Black and brown communities frankly have known a long time and experienced. That is that we have to do more to ensure our nation lives up to its founding promise of fair and impartial justice for all. This executive order is truly historic. It'll advance effective, accountable policing and criminal justice practices that will build public trust and thereby enhance public safety. The president was a huge supporter of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. He pressed for Congress to pass that bill. When they did not, when talks fell apart in the Senate after the House had passed the bill, the president pledged to take action, and that's what this executive order does. It bans chokeholds, it restricts no-knock warrants, it raises use of force standards, it creates a national database of records of law enforcement misconduct for the first time, and it takes dozens of other steps. It will directly impact over 100,000 federal law enforcement officers, and it'll establish federal law enforcement as a national role model for police departments around the country. Now, the president's signature legislative achievements also advance racial equity. I want to spend a moment on a couple of them: the American Rescue Plan, or ARP, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. ARP was designed with equity in mind. And with the right implementation support that we've been giving it, it has fueled what is the most equitable recovery in memory. The ARP led to the largest calendar year drop ever in both Black and Hispanic unemployment rates in 2021. It restored rural unemployment to pre-pandemic levels. It sparked record new business creation for Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans. It invested more than $31 billion in Indian country, and it brought forth the single largest reduction in the child poverty rate ever. The bipartisan infrastructure law is also a huge accomplishment and will be a major engine for driving forward equity. It has the potential to reverse decades of disinvestment in Black, Brown, Native, and tribal communities across the country. We're replacing lead pipes. We're increasing access to good paying jobs. We're expanding affordable high-speed internet across the country. We're investing in reliable transit. We're ensuring clean water for all. We're investing more than $13 billion additional dollars in tribal nations. And we're reconnecting communities divided by the federal highway system, significant portions of which were built through Black neighborhoods. All of this we need to do in partnership with state and local governments. That is where this money is going to get deployed and where critical decisions are going to be made about exactly how the funds are expended. The president is using all the tools at his disposal. It's not just those major signature legislative achievements. To date, the administration has also invested $5.8 billion in HBCUs, a major priority for the president. It is using the power of federal procurement, that is the federal spending power, to expand business opportunities for small disadvantaged businesses, including Black-owned businesses and others owned by people of color. It is launching an aggressive effort to combat racial discrimination in housing. The president also directed federal agencies to expand access to voter registration to help shore up our democracy and make sure everyone can participate. We've closed the gap in vaccination rates between Black and Latino adults and white adults. And the president has already delivered a number of wins for LGBT Americans, including ending the transgender military service ban. Equity is also at the forefront of the president's current budget proposal. And I want to highlight this because we are in the beginning of budgeting season right now in Congress, and we need Americans to pay attention to this. President Biden has often said, "Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value." I know, given your roles, that you know that reality well, and it is why his budget reflects equitable investments throughout. Just to give you a few examples, the president is seeking to invest through his budget $500 million in community violence intervention programs like violence interrupters or hospital-based intervention programs that'll help reduce homicides and shootings that disproportionately affect Black and Brown Americans. That is the beginning of a $5 billion commitment to fund these programs throughout the country. The budget would lower costs for mental health care and advance parity between mental health and substance use services and medical and surgical benefits within Medicare. It would double the maximum Pell Grant award, helping the nearly 60% of Black, almost half of Latino, half of American Indian or Alaska Native, and more than 1/3 of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students who rely on Pell to pursue higher education. The budget also shifts Indian Health Service funding from discretionary year-by-year funding to mandatory long-term funding. This is a critical change for Indian country. It would provide the IHS with stable, predictable healthcare funding that will keep pace with growing costs and population growth. The budget also invests in urgent reforms in the foster care system. This is one where I'm really proud of. I think the administration is out front on this, and I want to highlight it because I think it may be of interest to you. We know that children of color are more frequently removed from their homes, even when they're in circumstances similar to children living with white families. The president's FY23 budget expands prevention services. It incentivizes placement with relatives or other trusted adults, and it provides resources for youth who are aging out of the foster care so they can transition to adulthood with the support they need for housing, education, and workforce training. Now, these are just a few examples of how the president has infused equity into the fabric of his administration and how we're getting things done. But as the president has said when we released our government's equity action plans, advancing equity is not a one-year project. It's a generational commitment. And government can be a force multiplier for change, but we can't go it alone. We need your ideas, your partnership. And that's why this Social Equity Leadership Conference is so important. Together, we can continue to reimagine government, and we can bring the full promise of America closer for every American. Thank you very much.
That was awesome. I am excited about the view forward for America. I'm really excited to have you here at this conference and to share with all of our conference attendees exactly what we're doing to build back better and make America great. I think that we might have time for just one little question, if you will. If you can, I'd love to ask one question that I received so far.
Happy to do it.
Oh, thank you. So I'll just get right to it. I'm super excited, and thank you so much for allowing us to ask one question. I'll just say that there's a growing body of evidence that confirms citizen engagement helps to restore trust in government. What pivotal role can citizens play to help our government advance equity and build trust in underserved communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's so much you can do. The president has said repeatedly, it's going to take all of us working together to address the moral stain of white supremacy and systemic racism in our nation. That is not just a sort of high level point. I think the president, like no one else, has been able to make that point, and it's timely and it's critical, but it also needs to be reflected in our policy. You know, we are about getting things done. We are about making an impact in everyday Americans' lives day to day. And when you step back and think about it, and the question being about what role citizens can play, throughout so many chapters in our nation's history, from the civil rights movement to the Stonewall uprisings to the youth and family-driven movement we're seeing right now against gun violence, activism from citizens is the force that bends the arc of history toward justice. I mean, I firmly believe that. I deeply admire and applaud the commitment of advocates and activists to being a force for good in our democracy and working for racial equity in our communities across the country. You know, I think the commitment is critical, and it's got to be turned into action, and that happens by finding the inequity and hardship that moves a person most personally, by drawing on your own personal experience. We need people to have a personal stake in this, to have a stake in how their neighbors are experiencing life, how Americans who they might not think they have a lot in common with on a day-to-day are experiencing this country. Because we actually are, we are all Americans. We all have a stake in each other's well-being. It goes to the health of our communities. I think also it takes tuning out the voices that too often tell us, you know, we can't make a difference. There's not a lot we can do. I'm sure many of you have heard those voices. Sometimes they come from other people. Sometimes they're the voice in our head. And it's utter nonsense. I've seen change. I've been privileged to be part of it. I'm glad I am where I am right now, where I think we're making a difference in partnership with people across the country. And again, I want to just emphasize government can be a force multiplier for that change. So advocates need to push. Government needs to be responsive. It's not just the federal government. County commissioners, city councils, school boards, municipal managers. I don't have to tell this audience that that's where systemic and systematic equity either gets shunted aside or becomes part of the way of doing government. And as just everyday community members, people can get involved with their government at the local level. And I guess finally, I would just emphasize the critical nature of the threats to democracy that we are facing right now. You mentioned that earlier in your framing. I think that cannot be understated. People need to believe in this democracy, and they need to turn out and vote. So helping families and friends, people in your community to vote in every single election. I don't skip any votes. I participate in every single election, do the research, every single office matters. There really are no small races. They all have the capacity, all of these offices, to implement equity in different ways. So if you're talking to people in your community, I think just emphasizing that they shouldn't neglect the power of their ballot, that their vote did make a difference, that it is making a difference. And if they don't see candidates who are making that possible, who are inspiring them, then they should consider being that candidate themselves.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Baines. I just want to thank you very much for spending time with the 21st Annual Social Equity Leadership Conference. As you know, our conference theme focuses on promoting leadership for democracy and social equity. I just want to say that I consider you a social equity champion. I also want to thank you for showing us how leadership matters, for uplifting the leadership of President Biden, and for restoring hope in our country. Thank you so much for all that you do and continue to do to make democracy work.
Thank you. I very much appreciate the time and appreciate what all of you are doing as well. Take care.
All right, take care.